Mayor Douglas Hale and Chief Inspector Martin Reeves were once trusted to protect their town. But behind the scenes, they created a shocking lie. Instead of stopping crime, they made it up, spreading fear, staging arrests, and changing statistics until the entire town believed it was under attack. What started as a desperate attempt to save their failing administration turned into one of the most shocking deceptions ever revealed. The town used to be peaceful. Streets were safe, doors were unlocked, and children played outside until dark. Suddenly, everything changed. Newspapers published scary stories about gangs, robberies, and attacks at night. TV reports showed blurred images of supposed criminals and interviews with frightened residents. Yet no one had actually seen these crimes happen. The stories seemed to appear out of nowhere, but they spread quickly. People became afraid not because of what they saw, but because of what they were told. The administration, losing popularity, realized how powerful this fear could be. They encouraged it carefully, making people believe the town would fall apart without strong leadership. Within weeks, the town looked different. Police cars patrolled neighborhoods that had always been quiet. Loudspeakers warned people to stay alert. Flyers told families to lock their homes. Even evening walks became rare. Neighbors who once talked over fences avoided each other. The streets that were full of laughter became quiet. The illusion of danger had taken hold, and it felt real. Behind closed doors, the officials celebrated. Their plan worked. Approval ratings rose, and public trust returned to the leaders who had created the fear. Budgets for schools and healthcare were quietly shifted to pay for more police patrols, cameras, and community watch programs. People accepted the changes, believing they were necessary for safety. In just 1 month, the town had changed. A close-knit, friendly community now lived in fear. Few questioned the sudden shift, and those who did were told they were wrong. The more people were told to be afraid, the more they believed it and the more power the administration gained. A fake crisis had been born, tightening its grip every day. The administration also used numbers to make the fear seem real. Monthly reports claimed robberies had doubled, assaults were rising, and gangs were everywhere. Charts and graphs were shown on TV and at press events, making it look official. But the reality didn't match. Hospitals saw no rise in injuries, insurance companies received no increase in claims, and courts weren't handling more cases. The numbers simply didn't add up. Some journalists and researchers noticed the problems. They quietly checked police reports against public records and found many cases with no victims, witnesses, or files. Still, their findings were ignored. TV hosts repeated the official numbers without question, and scared citizens believed them. Doubting the reports was seen as irresponsible, and questioning them felt like betraying the town's safety. As fear deepened, the administration demanded more resources. Police patrols increased, and new surveillance cameras appeared on streetlights and storefronts. Curfews were introduced under the pretense of keeping citizens safe from imaginary threats. The more numbers were released, the more the measures seemed justified. Families who had never seen a crime firsthand now kept their homes locked tightly, convinced that criminals lurked just beyond their doors. Every sound at night became suspicious, every unfamiliar face a possible threat. Behind the illusion, the manipulation was deliberate. By inflating statistics, the administration controlled not only perception but also behavior. With the population convinced of a danger that did not exist, they accepted restrictions they might once have resisted. Fear had been transformed into obedience, and numbers were the silent weapon making it possible. In the end, the community had no way to tell where fact ended and fabrication began. And that was exactly how the administration intended it to stay. The next stage of the illusion demanded something more visible than numbers. Statistics could only hold public attention for so long before people wanted proof of the criminals supposedly terrorizing their town. To keep the fear alive, the administration began producing suspects. Patrol officers suddenly reported suspicious gatherings in quiet alleys, claiming to have broken up meetings of dangerous gangs. Young men with no criminal history were dragged from their homes and paraded as leaders of violent groups. Shopkeepers accused of petty disputes were labeled as masterminds of theft rings. These arrests were splashed across newspapers and broadcast on television, complete with images of handcuffed figures escorted by stern-faced officers. For the first time, the public could see villains to match the stories they had been fed. But behind the spectacle, the reality was far darker. Evidence was manufactured, with stolen goods planted in homes and weapons placed conveniently in cars. Witnesses were pressured into false statements, threatened with charges if they refused to cooperate. Courtrooms turned into stages where judges and prosecutors, guided by the administration's agenda, presented carefully rehearsed narratives. Trials became less about truth and more about reinforcing fear. The accused were stripped of their identities and turned into symbols of chaos. Every guilty verdict was treated as confirmation that the crime wave was real, even though many of those convicted had done nothing more than live in the wrong place or anger the wrong official. Families suffered in silence, unable to fight against a system determined to frame their loved ones. Communities that once thrived on trust now became divided, each household wondering if their neighbor might secretly be part of the so-called criminal underworld. People who had lived together peacefully for decades looked at one another with suspicion. The illusion had not only created false criminals, but also destroyed the bonds that held the town together. As weeks passed, the spectacle grew. News programs showcased dramatic raids on small businesses and staged footage of police storming abandoned buildings. These operations rarely uncovered anything of value, but the images were powerful enough to maintain the illusion. For the administration, the formula was simple: invent the crime, invent the criminal, and then broadcast the punishment. It was a cycle that strengthened their grip on the population while silencing any voice that dared to question the truth. Fear had become reality, not because it was real, but because people believed it was. The illusion began to falter when small cracks appeared in the carefully constructed narrative. At first, they were almost invisible, tiny inconsistencies buried in reports that most people ignored. A local journalist noticed that several arrests celebrated as victories against organized crime had no corresponding case files in the courthouse archives. A researcher discovered that names listed in official crime reports matched individuals who had been out of town at the time of the supposed incidents. These findings raised troubling questions, but the administration quickly dismissed them as clerical errors or attempts to undermine public safety. Still, the doubts continued to spread quietly among those willing to look closer. The real breakthrough came from within the system itself. A whistleblower inside the police department leaked confidential documents that revealed shocking details. Arrests that had been hailed as major operations were, in reality, carefully staged events. Some of the supposed gang members were actually undercover officers dressed in plain clothes, used as props to make raids appear legitimate. Evidence logs showed weapons and stolen goods circulating repeatedly through different cases, recycled to give the illusion of fresh discoveries. These revelations painted a disturbing picture of how far the administration was willing to go to maintain its story. Despite the administration's attempts to discredit the leaks, the documents began to circulate widely. Journalists published comparisons between official crime statistics and independent data, highlighting the massive discrepancies. Citizens who had once locked their doors in fear began to notice that their own neighborhoods had remained untouched by the supposed crime wave. Stories of ordinary people wrongfully accused and families torn apart gained traction, sparking anger instead of fear. The same television screens that had once broadcast terrifying images of criminals now flashed headlines questioning whether those criminals had ever existed at all. As the truth spread, the administration grew desperate. Officials doubled down on their claims, insisting that critics were part of a broader plot to weaken law enforcement. Yet every denial seemed weaker than the last, eroded by the weight of undeniable evidence. For the first time, the population began to push back. Protests formed outside government offices, demanding answers and accountability. The fear that had once silenced the community was now transforming into defiance. The cracks in the illusion were no longer small. They had widened into fractures that threatened to collapse the entire structure of lies the administration had built. When the deception could no longer be contained, the downfall of the administration was swift and brutal. Investigators from outside the town arrived with mandates to uncover the truth, armed with documents, witness testimonies, and years of hidden grievances. What they found was staggering: a network of fabricated crime reports, manipulated statistics, staged arrests, and a propaganda machine that had gripped the town in fear for months. The very leaders who had promised safety had orchestrated a campaign of control built entirely on lies. The discovery ignited a storm of outrage. Citizens who had lived in terror finally saw that the enemy had never been gangs or shadowy criminals, it had been the officials they trusted. Trials began, but unlike the ones staged against innocent townspeople, these proceedings carried undeniable evidence. Leaked files showed signed authorizations for false arrests, memos encouraging inflated crime numbers, and financial records revealing how security budgets had been drained for personal profit. The courtroom was packed with residents eager to witness justice. Testimonies from wrongfully accused individuals painted a harrowing picture of lives destroyed for the sake of political power. For every conviction handed down to the corrupt officials, the town's sense of betrayal deepened. It wasn't just about the crimes they had committed, it was about the trust they had shattered. As the administration collapsed, the community faced the difficult task of rebuilding. Families who had lost members to false imprisonment sought reconciliation. Journalists who had been silenced through intimidation found their voices again, determined to ensure such a deception could never take root in the same way. Activists pushed for reforms to prevent the manipulation of data and demanded transparency from future leaders. Slowly, the fog of fear began to lift, but it left scars that could not easily fade. In the end, the story of the fabricated crime crisis became more than a scandal, it was a lesson. The town had lived through a nightmare, not because criminals roamed the streets, but because fear had been weaponized by those in power. It proved that fear could be more dangerous than violence, and manipulation, more destructive than crime itself. The people emerged wiser, but also more cautious, forever aware that a brittle administration, desperate to survive, could invent enemies out of thin air and nearly destroy a community from within.